The crack of knuckles against flesh echoed through the dusty street of Caldwell, Idaho, and Grace Garrison tasted blood as another blow split her lip open. 5 men circling her like wolves while the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on this God-forsaken September day in 1883. She had tried to scream, but one of them had knocked the wind from her lungs with a vicious kick to her ribs, and now all she could do was curl into herself on the hard, packed earth, arms wrapped around her head as boots and fists rained down on her trembling body. The men laughed, their voices cruel and slurred with whiskey, and she wondered if this was how she would die at 22 years old, beaten to death in the street while the whole town looked away. "That will teach you to talk back to your betters," one of them snarled, drawing his leg back for another kick. The blow never came. Instead, Grace heard a sound like a gunshot, followed by a howl of pain that did not come from her own throat. Through the haze of agony and fear, she saw a tall figure moving with deadly purpose, his fists connecting with faces and bodies with brutal efficiency. Another crack, another scream, and 2 of her attackers crumpled to the ground clutching their faces, blood pouring between their fingers from shattered jaws. The remaining 3 men scrambled backward, suddenly sober enough to recognize real danger when it stood before them in dusty leather and worn denim. The stranger was tall and broad-shouldered, his face shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat, but Grace could see the set of his jaw and the cold fury in his eyes as he positioned himself between her and the men who had been beating her. "Get out of here before I break more than jaws," he said, his voice low and deadly calm. They ran, dragging their injured companions with them, leaving bloody trails in the dirt. The stranger watched them go, his hands still clenched into fists, and Grace saw his knuckles were split and bleeding. Only when the men had disappeared around the corner did he turn to her, and she saw his expression soften with concern. "Easy now," he said, kneeling beside her. "Let me see how bad it is." Grace tried to speak, but her mouth would not form words properly. Everything hurt, from her ribs to her face to her arms where she had tried to shield herself. Tears burned in her eyes, though whether from pain or relief or shame, she could not say. "I am going to pick you up," the stranger said gently. "We need to get you somewhere safe. Get those wounds looked at." Before she could protest or agree, he slipped one arm beneath her knees and another behind her back, lifting her as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. Grace gasped at the movement, fresh pain lancing through her ribs, but she found herself pressing against his chest anyway, seeking the safety and warmth his presence offered. He smelled of leather and horses and something clean, like sage after rain. "My name is Warren Hawthorne," he said as he carried her down the street, his long strides eating up the distance. "What is yours, Grace?" she managed to whisper. "Grace Garrison." "Well, Miss Garrison, you are safe now, I promise you that," she believed him. Despite the pain and the fear and the humiliation of what had just happened, she believed this stranger absolutely. There was something in his voice, something solid and real and trustworthy, that made her feel safer than she had felt in months. Warren carried her to a small boarding house at the edge of town, where a middle-aged woman named Mrs. Chen took one look at Grace's battered face and immediately ushered them inside. The woman asked no questions, simply directed Warren to lay Grace on a bed in a small back room and then set about heating water and gathering clean cloths. "I will leave you to her care," Warren said, but Grace found her hand shooting out to grab his wrist before he could step away. "Please," she whispered, "do not go." Something flickered in his eyes, some emotion she could not quite name, and he nodded slowly. "I will be right outside the door. I am not going anywhere." Mrs. Chen cleaned Grace's wounds with gentle efficiency, her touch sure and practiced. Grace learned that the woman had been a nurse during the war, that she had seen far worse than split lips and bruised ribs, though that knowledge did little to ease the burning pain as Mrs. Chen washed away the blood and dirt. "Nothing broken, Mrs. Chen said finally, sitting back with a satisfied nod. "You are very lucky. Those men could have killed you." "They wanted to teach me a lesson," Grace said quietly. "What kind of lesson requires 5 men to beat one woman?" Mrs. Chen's voice was sharp with anger. Grace closed her eyes, exhaustion washing over her now that the immediate danger had passed. The kind where a woman tells the foreman of the lumber mill that he has been cheating the workers out of their wages. The kind where she threatens to write to the territorial governor about it. Mrs. Chen made a soft sound of understanding. "You are brave. Foolish, perhaps, but brave." "My father worked at that mill until the day he died," Grace said, her voice breaking. "He died thinking he had left me with some savings, some security. Then I learned the foreman had been skimming money for years, that my father had earned twice what he was paid. All those men, breaking their backs for pennies while Samuel Reeves lined his pockets. The man who had you beaten." Grace nodded, then wished she had not as pain shot through her skull. "He told me to keep my mouth shut. When I refused, he sent his men after me." Mrs. Chen helped Grace into a clean nightgown, then pulled a quilt up over her. "You rest now. We will figure out what to do tomorrow." But Grace could not rest, not with her mind spinning and her heart racing. She stared at the ceiling, listening to the low murmur of voices from the other room where Warren and Mrs. Chen spoke. After a few minutes, there was a soft knock on the door, and Warren appeared in the doorway. "May I come in?" he asked. Grace nodded, pushing herself up to sitting despite the protest of her ribs. Warren pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down, his hat in his hands, and for the first time, Grace got a clear look at his face. He was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 25 or 26, with dark hair and gray eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. His jaw was strong and shadowed with stubble, and there was a small scar above his left eyebrow that gave him a roguish appearance. "Mrs. Chen told me what happened," he said, "about the mill foreman. Then you know I brought this on myself." "No." His voice was firm. "You brought nothing on yourself. Those men chose to do what they did. The fault lies with them, not with you." Grace felt tears burning in her eyes again. No one had said that to her. No one had taken her side. When she had tried to talk to the sheriff about Samuel Reeves, he had laughed in her face and told her to run along home like a good girl. The other mill workers had turned away from her, afraid of losing their jobs if they were seen associating with a troublemaker. "Where is home for you, Miss Garrison?" Warren asked gently. "I have a room above the general store," she said. "I work there, sweeping and stocking shelves. It does not pay much, but it is honest work. You cannot go back there. Not tonight, maybe not for a while. Reeves will come looking for you." Grace had already reached the same conclusion, and the thought made her feel hollow and afraid. "Then what am I supposed to do? I have no family left, no money saved. I cannot leave town." Warren was quiet for a long moment, turning his hat over in his hands. Finally, he looked up at her, his expression serious. "I have a ranch about 10 miles north of here. Nothing fancy, just a small spread with some cattle and horses. I could use help around the place and you would be safe there. Reeves would not dare come onto my property." Grace stared at him, hardly believing what she was hearing. "You want to hire me? You do not even know me." "I know you stood up for what was right, even when it put you in danger. I know you are brave and principled. That is enough for me." "Why are you doing this?" Grace whispered. "Why are you helping me?" Warren met her gaze steadily. "Because someone needs to. Because I saw what those men were doing to you and I could not walk away. And because in all my years, I have learned that the measure of a person is not in their words but in their actions. Your actions tell me you are worth helping." Grace felt something crack open in her chest, some wall she had built around her heart after her father died. This stranger, this cowboy who had appeared out of nowhere and saved her life, was offering her safety and employment without asking for anything in return. It seemed too good to be true, and yet she found herself wanting desperately to believe in it. "I accept," she said quietly. "And thank you, Mr. Hawthorne. I do not know how I will ever repay you." "Warren," he corrected with a small smile. "And you do not owe me anything, Grace. Just get better." She stayed at Mrs. Chen's boarding house for 3 days, long enough for the worst of the swelling to go down and for her ribs to stop screaming every time she took a breath. Warren visited twice a day, bringing fresh flowers and books borrowed from the town library, and sitting with her while she ate the meals Mrs. Chen prepared. He told her about his ranch, about the horses he raised and the cattle he ran, about the challenges of working the land in Idaho's high desert country. Grace found herself looking forward to his visits, to the sound of his voice and the warmth of his smile. He was different from any man she had known, quiet and thoughtful but with an underlying strength that made her feel protected. He never pressed her for details about the attack, never made her feel weak or foolish for what had happened. He simply sat with her and talked, and gradually, Grace felt some of the fear and shame begin to ease. On the morning of the 4th day, Warren arrived with a wagon and helped Grace climb up onto the seat beside him. Mrs. Chen had packed a basket of food and medicine, along with stern instructions about rest and recovery, and Grace hugged the older woman tightly before they set off. The ride north was beautiful, the September morning crisp and clear with the first hints of autumn color touching the cottonwoods along the creek. Warren drove with easy confidence, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the area, and Grace found herself relaxing despite the jolting of the wagon over the rough road. "How long have you had the ranch?" she asked. "About 4 years now. I saved every penny from working cattle drives and bought the land when it came up for sale. It is not much, but it is mine." "Where are you from originally?" "Kansas. My family had a farm there, but the grasshoppers destroyed the crops 3 years running and we lost everything. My parents moved back east to live with my mother's sister, but I wanted to stay out west. Idaho seemed like as good a place as any to start fresh." Grace understood that impulse all too well. Her own father had brought her to Idaho after her mother died of cholera, hoping the change would help them both heal from their grief. In some ways, it had worked. They had built a good life here, simple but satisfying, until her father's death 6 months ago had left her alone and struggling. "What about you?" Warren asked. "How did you end up in Caldwell?" Grace told him about her father, about growing up in a small mining camp in Colorado before moving to Idaho when she was 15. She talked about learning to read and write from the camp schoolteacher, about her father's dream of saving enough money to buy a little piece of land where they could settle down properly. She spoke carefully around the pain of his death, but Warren seemed to understand anyway. His hand found hers on the wagon seat, giving it a gentle squeeze, and Grace felt tears prick her eyes at the simple kindness of the gesture. The ranch appeared as they crested a low rise, a neat collection of buildings nestled in a valley with a creek running through it. The main house was small but well built, with a wide porch and stone chimney. There was a barn, a chicken coop, a corral with several horses, and what looked like a bunkhouse off to one side. "It is beautiful," Grace said softly. Warren smiled, clearly pleased. "Come on, let me show you around." He helped her down from the wagon, his hands careful on her waist, and Grace felt a flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with her injuries. For the first time, she noticed how handsome he was, how kind his eyes were when he looked at her. She pushed the thought away quickly. Warren was her employer now, nothing more. She could not afford to develop feelings for him, not when he was offering her a fresh start. The house was simple inside, with a main room that served as both kitchen and living area, a bedroom and a small loft above. Everything was clean and well-maintained, though it had the slightly bare look of a bachelor's home without curtains or decorations to soften the space. "You can have the bedroom," Warren said. "I will sleep in the loft." "I could not possibly take your room," Grace protested. "Yes, you can. You are injured and you need proper rest. Besides, I am used to sleeping rough. A loft is luxury compared to some places I have bedded down." Grace wanted to argue further, but the exhaustion from the wagon ride was catching up with her, and the thought of a real bed was too tempting to resist. Warren must have seen it in her face because he smiled and gently steered her toward the bedroom. "Rest," he said. "I will take care of the horses and get dinner started." Grace slept through the afternoon and woke to the smell of something savory cooking. She found Warren in the kitchen, stirring a pot of stew over the stove, and she felt a pang of guilt at having slept while he worked. "I should be helping you," she said. Warren turned, his face lighting up when he saw her. "You are supposed to be resting." "I have rested enough. Put me to work." He hesitated, then nodded. "All right. You can set the table if you are feeling up to it." They ate together as the sun set beyond the windows, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The stew was simple but good, and Grace found herself eating more than she had in days. Warren told her about his plans for the ranch, about wanting to expand the herd and maybe try his hand at breeding better horses. Grace listened and asked questions, and it felt surprisingly natural, sitting across the table from this man she had known for less than a week. Over the following days, they fell into a routine. Grace helped with cooking and cleaning, mending clothes and tending the garden that grew behind the house. Warren worked the ranch, riding out each morning to check on the cattle and horses, repairing fences and equipment. In the evenings, they would eat together and talk, sharing stories about their lives and dreams. Grace found herself growing stronger, both physically and emotionally. The bruises faded, her ribs stopped aching, and the fear that had haunted her since the attack began to recede. She felt safe here on the ranch, protected not just by distance from town but by Warren's steady presence. He never pushed her, never made her feel uncomfortable or obligated. He was simply there, kind and patient and impossibly decent. 2 weeks after Grace arrived at the ranch, Warren came back from town with news that made her heart sink. Samuel Reeves had been asking about her, telling anyone who would listen that Grace owed him money and had stolen from the general store before running off. The lies were transparent, but they were still dangerous. Reeves had friends in town, men who would believe him or at least pretend to, and Grace knew it was only a matter of time before someone came looking for her. "I will not let him take you," Warren said firmly when Grace expressed her fears. "You are under my protection now. But what if he brings the sheriff? What if they arrest me?" "The sheriff has no cause to arrest you. Reeves can make all the accusations he wants, but without proof, they are just words." Grace wanted to believe him, but she had learned the hard way that justice was not always just. Men like Reeves had power and influence, and they used it to crush anyone who stood in their way. That night, Grace lay awake in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling around her. She heard the horses moving in the corral, the soft hoot of an owl hunting in the cottonwoods, and somewhere above her, the creak of floorboards as Warren moved around in the loft. She thought about everything that had happened, about how her life had changed so drastically in such a short time. A month ago, She had been alone and frightened, trapped in a town where no one would help her. Now she was here, safe and cared for, and it was all because of one man who had refused to walk away when she needed help. Grace realized with a start that she was falling in love with Warren Hawthorne. The thought should have frightened her, but instead it felt right, like something inevitable and true. She loved the way he smiled when he came in from working all day, tired but satisfied. She loved how he always asked her opinion, treating her as an equal rather than a servant. She loved his quiet strength, the way he could be gentle with a frightened horse or devastating in a fight. She loved everything about him, and the realization made her heart ache with equal parts joy and fear. Warren was her employer, her protector. He had saved her life and given her a home when she had nowhere else to go. She could not burden him with her feelings, could not risk ruining what they had built. So she kept her love locked inside, treasuring it privately while maintaining the careful boundaries of their arrangement. October arrived with cooler temperatures and brilliant fall colors. Warren taught Grace to ride, starting her on a gentle mare named Daisy and patiently correcting her form as she learned to sit a horse properly. They rode out together to check the cattle, and Grace loved the freedom of it, the wind in her hair and the vast sky stretching overhead. One afternoon, they stopped to rest beside the creek, letting the horses drink while they sat on the bank and shared the lunch Grace had packed. The aspens were golden overhead, their leaves rustling in the breeze, and the water burbled cheerfully over smooth stones. "I never thanked you properly," Grace said suddenly. Warren looked at her, his expression questioning. "For what? For saving me? For giving me all of this?" She gestured at the ranch, the horses, the beautiful fall day. "You changed my life, Warren. You gave me hope when I had none." He was quiet for a moment, his gray eyes searching her face. "You do not need to thank me, Grace. Having you here, it has changed my life too. The ranch does not feel empty anymore. It feels like a home." Grace's heart hammered in her chest. There was something in his voice, something in the way he was looking at her that made her breath catch. "Warren, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. She had never been one to play games or hide her feelings, and she would not start now. "I have fallen in love with you. I know I should not say it. I know it complicates things, but I cannot keep it inside anymore. You are the best man I have ever known, and I love you with all my heart." Warren stared at her, his expression stunned, and for a terrible moment, Grace thought she had made a horrible mistake. Then his face broke into the biggest smile she had ever seen, and he reached out to cup her cheek with his rough, calloused hand. "Grace," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I have been in love with you since the moment I saw you, broken and bleeding in that street, still fighting with everything you had. You are the bravest, most beautiful woman I have ever known, and I wake up every day grateful that you are here with me." Grace felt tears streaming down her face, but these were tears of joy, not pain. "You love me." "More than I thought possible," Warren said, and then he kissed her. It was gentle and sweet, his lips warm against hers, and Grace felt like her heart might burst from happiness. She kissed him back, pouring all her love and gratitude and hope into that single perfect moment. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling, and Warren rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know it is fast. I know we have not known each other long, but I do not want to waste another day. Marry me, Grace." "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, absolutely yes." They were married a week later in the small church in Caldwell with Mrs. Chen and a few of Warren's friends from neighboring ranches in attendance. Grace wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Chen had helped her alter, and Warren wore his best shirt and a string tie. The ceremony was short but meaningful, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Warren kissed Grace like she was the most precious thing in the world. They held a small celebration afterward at Mrs. Chen's boarding house, with food and music and genuine warmth. Grace looked around at the faces of these people who had become her friends, who had accepted her and stood by her, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. This was what family felt like, what belonging felt like. As the evening wore on, Grace noticed a commotion outside. Through the window, she saw Samuel Reeves and several of his men riding up, their faces angry. Her stomach dropped and she felt Warren tense beside her. "Stay here," he said quietly, but Grace shook her head. "No, we do this together." They walked outside together, Warren's hand steady on Grace's back. Reeves dismounted, his eyes narrowing when he saw them. "Well, well," he said sneeringly. "The little troublemaker got herself hitched. Does your new husband know what kind of woman you really are? A liar and a thief." "The only liar here is you, Reeves," Warren said calmly. "And I suggest you get back on your horse and ride out of here before this gets ugly." Reeves laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You broke the jaws of 2 of my best men, cost me a lot of money in doctor bills. I think you owe me compensation." "I think you owe compensation to every man you have cheated over the years," Grace said, stepping forward. "I have written to the territorial governor about your practices, Reeves. I documented everything, every shorted wage, every falsified record. The letter went out yesterday." Reeves's face went red with rage. "You have no proof of anything." "Actually, she does." A new voice spoke up, and Grace turned to see one of the mill workers stepping out of the crowd. Then another and another, until a dozen men stood in a line facing Reeves. "We kept our own records," the first man said. "We were afraid to speak up before, but Mrs. Hawthorne showed us we do not have to be afraid anymore. We are done being cheated." Reeves looked around at the faces of his workers, saw the determination there, and seemed to deflate slightly. Without his hired muscle and facing down so many witnesses, he had no power. He pointed a shaking finger at Grace and Warren. "This is not over," he snarled. "Yes, it is," Warren said. "You are finished here, Reeves. Now get out of my sight before I finish what I started." Reeves and his men rode off, and a cheer went up from the crowd. Grace found herself being hugged by the mill workers, by Mrs. Chen, by people she barely knew but who had been inspired by her courage. Warren pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple, and Grace felt a wave of triumph and relief wash over her. They rode back to the ranch that night as husband and wife, the stars brilliant overhead and the autumn air cool against their skin. Warren helped Grace down from the wagon and they stood together in the yard, wrapped in each other's arms. "Are you happy?" Warren asked softly. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible," Grace said, tilting her face up for a kiss. "I love you, Warren Hawthorne." "I love you too, Grace Hawthorne." Now and always. The months that followed were some of the best of Grace's life. She and Warren worked the ranch together, building their future one day at a time. They expanded the herd, bought more land, and slowly turned the modest spread into something prosperous and successful. News came from the territorial capital that Samuel Reeves had been arrested and charged with embezzlement and fraud. The mill workers received their back wages, and a new foreman was appointed who ran things honestly. Grace threw herself into life on the ranch with enthusiasm, learning everything Warren could teach her about horses and cattle and the land. She discovered she had a gift for training horses, a patience and intuition that made her a natural. Warren built her a proper training corral, and soon people from neighboring ranches were bringing their difficult horses to Grace, knowing she could gentle them where others had failed. Winter came hard that year, with heavy snows and bitter cold. Warren and Grace spent long evenings by the fire, reading and talking and planning for the spring. They spoke of their dreams, of the family they hoped to have, of growing old together on this land they both loved. Grace had never felt so content, so completely at peace with her life. In February, Grace realized she was pregnant. She told Warren over breakfast on a snowy morning, watching his face transform from surprise to pure joy. He swept her up in his arms, spinning her around the kitchen while she laughed and protested that he would make her dizzy. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We are going to be parents." Grace placed her hand on her still flat stomach, imagining the life growing there. Their child would be born into love and safety, would grow up on this beautiful ranch with the mountains rising in the distance and the creek singing through the valley. It was everything she had ever wanted. Their son was born in late October, exactly 1 year after Grace and Warren had married. The labor was long and difficult, but Mrs. Chen was there to help, and Warren never left Grace's side. When the baby finally arrived, squalling and red-faced and perfect, Warren held him with tears streaming down his face. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "I am your papa." They named him Thomas, after Grace's father, and he was the image of Warren with his dark hair and serious gray eyes. Grace had never known love like this existed, the fierce protective devotion she felt for her child. Watching Warren with Thomas, seeing the gentle way he held their son and sang to him, made her fall in love with her husband all over again. Thomas grew into a lively, curious toddler who followed his father everywhere, mimicking everything Warren did. Grace often found them together in the barn, Thomas holding a tiny hammer while Warren worked on repairs, or in the corral where Thomas would stand on the fence rails and watch his mother train horses. When Thomas was 2, Grace gave birth to twin daughters, Sarah and Margaret. The girls had Grace's auburn hair and their father's strong features, and they brought even more joy and chaos to the Hawthorne household. Warren proved himself an endlessly patient father, changing diapers and soothing colicky babies without complaint. Grace watched him rock both girls to sleep one night, one in each arm, and thought her heart might overflow with happiness. Years passed in a blur of seasons and milestones. The ranch continued to prosper, becoming known throughout Idaho for its quality horses and cattle. Grace's reputation as a horse trainer spread, and she often had more work than she could handle. Warren served for a time on the territorial council, using his position to advocate for honest business practices and fair treatment of workers. Together, they became respected members of their community, known for their integrity and kindness. They weathered hard times too, droughts and harsh winters and the everyday challenges of ranching life. But they faced everything together, their love a steady foundation that held firm through whatever storms came their way. Grace never forgot where she had come from, never took for granted the miracle of her life with Warren. Some nights, she would lie awake beside her sleeping husband and marvel at how far she had traveled from that terrible day in Caldwell, when 5 men had been beating her in the street, and a cowboy had broken 2 jaws and carried her away to safety. That cowboy had saved her life in more ways than one. He had given her not just physical rescue, but hope and love and a future she had never imagined possible. He had shown her what true partnership looked like, what it meant to be cherished and respected. And in return, Grace had given him her whole heart, building a life together that was richer and more meaningful than either of them could have created alone. Thomas grew into a fine young man, tall and strong like his father, with the same quiet determination and gentle nature. He worked the ranch alongside Warren, learning everything about the land and the animals. The twins became skilled riders, fearless and capable, and Grace took pride in teaching them not just to sit a horse, but to truly understand and communicate with them. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Warren surprised Grace with a trip to Boys. They left the ranch in Thomas's capable hands and spent a week exploring the growing city, staying in a fancy hotel and eating in restaurants with white tablecloths. It felt strange and wonderful to have this time alone together, to remember what it was like to be just the two of them. One evening, they walked along the river as the sun set, and Warren took Grace's hand in his. "You remember that day by the creek?" he asked, "when you told me you loved me?" "Of course," Grace said, smiling at the memory. "I was terrified you would think I was foolish. I thought you were the bravest person I had ever met. I still do." Warren stopped walking and turned to face her, his hands cupping her face gently. 20 years, Grace. 20 years, and I love you more now than I did on that day. Thank you for saying yes, for taking a chance on a poor cowboy with nothing but a dream." Grace felt tears sting her eyes, but they were happy tears. "You gave me everything, Warren. You saved me, not just that day in town, but every day since. You taught me what love really means." They kissed there by the river as the stars began to emerge overhead, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. When they returned to the ranch, they were greeted by their children and several grandchildren, for Thomas had married a sweet young woman named Emma 2 years before, and they already had 2 children of their own. The house was full of noise and laughter and love, and Grace looked around at all these people who existed, because she and Warren had found each other, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. More years passed, bringing more grandchildren and the expansion of the ranch as Thomas and Emma took on more responsibilities. Warren's hair turned silver, and Grace found lines around her eyes when she looked in the mirror, but they were laugh lines, evidence of a life well lived. They worked less and sat on the porch more, watching their grandchildren play in the yard where their own children had played, watching the seasons turn and the world change around them. One autumn evening, when Grace was 62 and Warren 65, they sat together on that same porch, wrapped in blankets against the cooling air. The aspens were gold on the hillsides, just as they had been all those years ago when Warren had first kissed her by the creek. Grace leaned her head on his shoulder and Warren wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "You have any regrets?" Grace asked softly. Warren was quiet for a moment, considering. "Only that I did not meet you sooner," he said finally. "I would have liked more years with you." Grace smiled and laced her fingers through his. "We have had a good life, Warren, a wonderful life. 3 children, 7 grandchildren, and who knows how many more to come. We built this ranch together, created a legacy. We loved each other well. I could not ask for more." "Neither could I," Warren agreed, pressing a kiss to her hair. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Grace Hawthorne. My reason, my heart, my home." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. From inside the house, they could hear the sounds of family preparing dinner, voices raised in laughter and easy conversation. Thomas came out to check on them, and they assured him they were fine, just enjoying the evening. Grace thought about that frightened, beaten young woman she had been all those years ago, alone and desperate in a town that had turned its back on her. She thought about Warren, riding into her life like something out of a story, breaking jaws and carrying her to safety. She thought about every moment since, every challenge overcome and joy celebrated, every day they had chosen each other and chosen love. It had all been worth it, every struggle and hardship, because it had led her here, to this porch and this man and this life. She had been saved that day in Caldwell, but the real salvation had come in all the days after, in learning to trust and love and build something lasting. Warren squeezed her hand gently, as if he knew what she was thinking, and Grace squeezed back. They sat together as the stars emerged one by one overhead, two people who had found each other in the Wild West and never let go. Their love story had started with violence and rescue, but it had become something far more profound, a testament to the power of courage and kindness, and the choice to love deeply and well. As night settled over the ranch, Grace and Warren finally rose and went inside, where their family waited with warmth and food and welcome. They took their seats at the big table Warren had built years ago, now surrounded by children and grandchildren, and Grace looked around at all these beautiful faces and felt complete. This was her legacy, not just the ranch or the horses or the land, but this family built on a foundation of true love. She reached for Warren's hand under the table and he took it immediately, his grip still strong and sure. They had built this together, and it was good. The years continued to pass gently after that, filled with the simple pleasures of grandchildren and quiet days, and a love that had only deepened with time. Warren and Grace grew old together on the ranch they had built, surrounded by family and beauty and the land they loved. They never forgot that day in Caldwell, the day their story had begun, but it was just the first chapter in a long and remarkable book. When they finally passed, many years later and within months of each other, they left behind a ranch that thrived, a family that loved deeply, and a story that would be told for generations. The story of how a cowboy had saved a woman being beaten in the street, had broken two jaws and carried her away to safety, and how that single act of courage had blossomed into a love that lasted a lifetime. Their grandchildren would tell their own children about Grace and Warren, about the strength and kindness that had defined them, about the legacy of love they had left behind. And those children would grow up knowing that true love was real, that heroes existed, and that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the very best, if we are brave enough to trust and hope and reach for happiness when it is offered. The ranch still stands today, a testament to what Grace and Warren built together, to the power of love and courage and two hearts that found each other against all odds. Their story became legend in that part of Idaho, but to those who knew them, who loved them, it was simply the truth of two remarkable people who had lived and loved extraordinarily well. In the end, Grace Garrison Hawthorne had been saved that day in Caldwell, but she had also been found. Found by a man who saw her worth, who valued her courage, who loved her completely. And together, they had created something beautiful and lasting, a love story for the ages set against the wild backdrop of the American West in all its danger and glory and infinite possibility.